Okay, Logan, thank you for your performance from yesterday. So we're going to start with a really generic question, okay? And we just want you to talk to us about the outline of your research process. So why you decided to do this topic, how you came to finalising the topic, and what kind of literature you looked at in order to go through that process.
Yeah, of course. So my process began with trying to just find something that I could relate to, or just something that I found interesting, because I didn't want to do a topic that I would like burn myself out on or just not enjoy doing. And I don't pride myself on being very politically aware, or just being a very political person in general. So I started looking into Jerzy Grotowski, which is a movement practitioner, and specifically his book, Towards a Poor Theatre. In the book, Grotowski focuses on stripping away the theatrical excess of shows and like the spectacle of a theatrical performance, in order to get to the authenticity and the honesty of a performer, and like find out what the performance is essentially. And there is a quote where he says, here everything is concentrated on the ripening of the actor, which is expressed by attention towards the extreme, by a complete stripping down. And that I found really interesting as a performance quality or a performance style that I could potentially look into. He goes on to speak about eliminating thoughts of egotism and self-enjoyment. Those words are from his book, Towards a Poor Theatre. And he refers to these as the man's thoughts, which led me into masculinity as the political concept and the main political concept. Stripping masculinity back reminded me of quite animalistic tendencies, going into the ape and the gorilla, which led me into looking at Terry Notary and Andy Serkis, who are choreographers who did a lot of work on the Planet of the Apes movies and the Dawn of the Apes and that whole franchise. And Terry Notary speaks about how an ape is almost exactly the same as a human, just without the manners and the social conditioning that we have. All of this felt very interesting, but it felt like it didn't really take me anywhere specific. So that's when I started looking into hegemonic masculinity. This is a phrase coined by Rywin Connell, or R.W. Connell, often cited, who is an Australian sociologist who in 1995 released a book titled Masculinities. This, the second version of this book, released in 2005, became the centrepiece for most of my research, led me on to looking into other things. And in Masculinities, she talks about 4 different types of masculinity, focused on specifically hegemonic masculinity, but the other 3 are subordinate masculinity, complacent masculinity, and hegemonic masculinity, subordinate masculinity, complacent or complicit masculinity, and marginal masculinity. Hegemonic masculinity was the one I found most interesting because it was the one that also led Connell's research primarily, and a lot of the research that was brought from other literatures or other theorists that Connell brought into her research, all focused on the implications of hegemonic masculinity and the effects that it causes. Hegemonic masculinity itself refers to the dominant form of masculinity within a given culture, characterized typically by traits such as strength, dominance, emotional suppression, and it reinforces power dynamics and expectations around gender. That specifically is what I found really interesting, was the expectation, or in other words, the assumption of what the an observer will expect of someone.
Can I just ask, you mentioned in that masculinity by Connell
Yes.
that it led you to other theories
Mhm.
and other findings. Could you
Mhm.
just elaborate a little bit more?
Yes, of course. One of these, which gave me a lot of inspiration for my piece, was an experiment done by an Australian journalist, Mary Beth Longmore, in whom Connell talks about in Masculinities. She discovered, or did an experiment in order to discover how the knowledge of power influences men, and her point was that women are more likely to ask for directions, ask a stranger for directions when out and about, and this is because men believe that a lack of knowledge makes them inferior to another person, so they tend to not ask for directions in this specific context. There's a quote as well, speaking about Connell's words about Mary Beth Longmore's study that she did, that says, women also don't understand that men view having information as a form of hierarchy, so people with more information are further up the hierarchy. Miss Longmore said it was for this reason that men tended not to ask a stranger for directions, because it was admitting that they were in some way inferior. This is supported by a theorist called Anika Kronsell, and she did an article titled Gendered Practices in Institutions of Hegemonic Masculinity. This specific article focused on institutions of hegemonic masculinity, which are institutions, this is the quote, institutions largely governed by men have produced and recreated norms and practices associated with masculinity and heterosexuality. Although not explicitly expressed, in some of these institutions, hegemonic masculinity has become the norm. This specifically relates to the military or international relations, because Kronsell further goes on to say, military, defence and security related institutions highly relevant to the core of international relations work have historically been owned by men and have occupied by men's bodies, which also has influenced these institutions' agendas, politics and policies.
Great, I'm just going to move on just because of time.
Of course.
So you talk about this homogeneous expression of gender. Can you
Yes.
tell me a little bit about that?
So the homogeneous expression of gender, homogeneous meaning alike, similar to monotone. This homogeneous expression of gender is what I wanted to focus in as the issue coming with hegemonic masculinity. In order to understand the implications or the effects of a homogeneous expression of gender, I tried to look into the importance of connection or understanding the self within a performer in order to produce a heterogeneous expression of gender, and the beauty and the reason for creating or the importance for creating a heterogeneous expression of gender.
So can you tell us about a specific moment from your performance that you think kind of really represents this argument that you're trying to portray?
Yes, of course. Just give me a second to find. There's a theorist called Charles Cooley who has a theory called the looking glass self, and this specific theory inspired the moment in the performance where I'm sat on stage and I'm painting my nails, and then there's a phone call or there is a ringtone, I come to the front of the stage and answer the phone to what is, for the purpose of the performance, my dad, and I start speaking to my dad. But through the performance, I represent the pressures to conform to my dad's expectations. My dad didn't specifically in that moment say or put any direct pressure to conform to these hegemonic masculinity norms, but the performer's assumption or the assumption of expectation of an observer. There is a quote by Charles Cooley that states, I am not what I think I am not what you think I am what I think that you think I am. Which is a lot of thinks and I's and ams. But breaking it down, he talks about imagining others' perceptions, which is basically how individuals imagine they are perceived in social situations. Linking again back to that moment in the performance, I assumed my dad would want me to be working out or want me to know about the football match that happened the day before, supporting this pressure, notion of pressure from hegemonic masculinity.
Great. We're going to finish there. Thank you.
Thank you.